What's going on? I'm Yoronga, and today I'm going to teach you how to make an Odesza style track just like this. Go! For this video, the aim of the game is to try and create something in the same ballpark as A Moment Apart. So we want to try and create something super cinematic, super emotional, but we also want it to hit pretty hard. Now, when it comes to this video, I'm going to assume that you're relatively new to making music. That's why I'm going to go over everything in as much detail as I possibly can. If you are a bit more experienced though, I apologize in advance if I'm going to teach you things that you might already know, but just remember at any given point in time, you can exercise your free will and just skip ahead. Or guess what? You could even close the browser. Please don't be someone that leaves a mean comment. I assure you, I'm a nice person. Alright, so over in FL, the very first thing we're going to do is set the BPM of our track. And when you try and make an Odesza style song, it doesn't really matter what BPM you choose. Look, Odesza has a huge range of tracks that can be as slow as, let's say, 70 BPM all the way up to about 150 BPM. Usually when I'm trying to create an Odesza style song, I'll try and stay between, I guess, 100 to 130. That's kind of around that slower future bass style. And look, as you'll see, today I've set my BPM to 124. Now there is a specific reason why I did that, and that's because I have this ARP that's going to play throughout the entirety of my song, and it sounds quite good at 124. So this is what it sounds like. Now look, I'm going to explain how I made this ARP in a second, but if you don't have a sound that you're starting with, which I'm guessing that you don't, try and just set the BPM anywhere from 100 to 130. Now, before I even break down what this ARP is, the very first thing I do after setting the BPM is make a chord progression. Now, even if I'm not using the chord progression from the very beginning of the song, I just find it super important to create one first, so that way it just lets me know where my song is going to sit on the sound spectrum. So over in my instruments here, what you'll see is I have an instrument called chords, and this isn't colored like anything else in my instrument rack. And that's because I didn't actually use these chords in my song. I essentially just created them in the beginning and used them as the foundation for building the rest of my song. So if I open up these chords here, this is what they're going to sound like. So it's just a super simple chord progression. And if you're brand new to using FL or brand new to making music, don't stress. It is super simple to make a chord progression in FL if you don't know any music theory. All you have to do is open up a new instrument, then head over to your channel rack, open up FL keys here, right click inside of it, open the piano roll, and click this little spanner icon, and then select to generate a chord progression. Now from here, all you need to do is select the key of your song. And if you're trying to make a song in the same vibe as A Moment Apart, definitely choose a minor key. A good way to find the key for your song is to just go and search for a reference track from a song that you already like, and just Google what key it's in. Now, I've just gone with C minor today, but if you want something super emotional or melodic, probably go anywhere from C to F. Then all you have to do is click this button and it will generate a perfect chord progression for you. And guess what? If you don't like it, just hit the button again and it'll give you another option. Then once you have those chords, click accept and it's gonna make this perfect chord progression for you. And as I mentioned, I already have one before, so I'm just gonna delete that. And these are some pretty basic chords, but of course, we're gonna make some changes to these later on in our tutorial. Now, as I mentioned, it's so important to create these chords because I want the ARP that I'm about to show you to sit around these chords. So I personally just find that when you play straight chords in a song, they can sound just a little boring. There's not really much movement or character to them. So that's why I've added in that ARP, but I want it to sit on top of this because later on when we build out all of these synths in our chorus, these notes are going to be quite loud. So if our ARP sits inside or below these notes, it's just going to get drowned out in all the sound. So what I actually like to do is copy the top notes of my chord progression. Then I'll make another instrument. In this case, I've made an ARP here. And if I open this ARP up and paste in those notes, what you'll see is that most of my notes actually sit on top of it, which is what I just explained. Now, when it comes to creating an ARP, which I should just quickly mention, ARP is short for an arpeggiation. Instead of playing those chords as solid notes like this, what it's gonna do is just turn them into nice little plucks. And it just makes a nice little melody or rhythm that keeps the listener interested. If you don't know how to use a keyboard or you don't know music theory, all you have to do is go up to this keyboard icon, right click it and put it in the same key that you selected from your chord progression. And then you can literally bash any note on your keyboard and it's gonna sound perfect. It's gonna be in key. And so that is how I found my groove into something like this. Now for the actual sound of this, I'm just using a basic Serum preset. If you're new to making music, I'd recommend just going out and buying a bunch of sample packs. The last thing you want to do is be overwhelmed by creating your own unique sounds. 9 times out of 10, you probably have a specific idea that you just want to get out as quickly as possible. Now in terms of processing this ARP here, I've just routed this to a channel in my channel rack, and I've just made a few minor tweaks to it, nothing too major, but if I remove all of these effects, this is what the ARP sounds like. So as you can see, it's really narrow. There's not really much texture to it, and it doesn't really feel spacey, which we want to go for those big a moment apart vibes. So we need that space sound. So all I've done is I've taken off some of the high end. Then I've added on a fruity flanger. And look, I just want to apologize. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that, but it's my Australian accent.
Yeah, that's one of the most commonly asked questions, is what does crikey mean?
The next thing I've done is added a ton of reverb to this to really make it sound wide and open. And then finally, I added some stereo enhancer to it just to, again, make it sound wider. So this is what the ARP will sound like. Now, the beautiful thing about creating an ARP at the start of your song is you can use that throughout the entirety of your track. It's going to give your track this constant feel of movement. And if you listen to A Moment Apart, it actually also uses an ARP at the beginning of the song. Moving forward, the next thing I have is just a pad. Now, this pad is pretty straightforward. I've just copied across the top notes of my chord progression. So if I open up my chords, I've just grabbed the top notes, not the bass notes, added a new instrument in, and once again, I've just used a Serum preset. And in terms of processing, I've just sidechained this. So if I go over to the pad, I've added some Kickstarter onto it. If I play it without that, this is what it sounds like. So it's not bad, but when I add the Kickstarter on, it just gives it a bit more movement. So back in my project, if I put these two together, this is what it sounds like so far. So while that's a good start, I think it's just really lacking a lot of atmosphere, and we really need to give it more low end. So what I've done is I've added in a respace. Now, when it comes to making this res, once again, I've just gone back to my chord progression. I've grabbed my bass notes. I've copied those across into their own instrument, and I'm just using this flex patch, which is called Creeper Drone. If you're relatively new to FL, Flex is just like their version of Serum. And whenever I'm using a respace, I only ever really use one sound, and it's this Creeper Drone here. Just a word of advice, when you paste in your bass notes, they'll usually sit quite low, so they might sound like this. So what I like to do is just pitch them up an octave, and it really gives it this warmth that sits in the middle of your mix. Now, unlike my pad, I'm not going to sidechain that. I'm just going to leave that playing out the individual notes as it is. Then moving forward, I've just sprinkled in a couple of additional atmospheres here. So I've just gone into Splice. I've literally just searched the word atmosphere, and I've just tried to grab some additional textures. So this is what they sound like. I'll go through these individually actually. And another thing I like to do is actually add in a bunch of one-shot atmospheres. So instead of adding in loops, I'll just grab little snippets that I can place here and there just to kind of fill in some of the space in the mix and create kind of like a little bit of ear candy to keep the listener interested.
Flight 229er, you're clear for departure. Flight 527, I have your release.
And as you can see, I've just created an automation that pans those from side to side. And the very last one I added was this little one shot, which kind of sounds like a bit of a shooting star. And so look, that is the basis of the start of our song. I guess the main thing you want to do right out of the gate is kind of create this big atmosphere. But after 8 bars, we need the song to really start to progress and go somewhere. So this is where we can add in some of the rhythmic components. And particularly if we're going with the Odesza vibe, we need to add in some percussion elements. So what I've done is I've just added in a couple of different percussion loops here. Now, if you're trying to replicate Odesza's sound, you can't avoid using percussion. If you listen to any Odesza song, their percussion is next level. It really just keeps you hooked while you're listening to their music. It creates a really good atmosphere, a really good rhythm, and it just makes it interesting. Now, while Odesza is next level at percussion, thankfully you don't have to be. You can kind of fake it like I've done here. Instead of creating your own custom percussion loop, what you can do is just layer some on top of each other, and it just creates this sense of rhythm. One thing I will mention though is when you're looking for samples like this, try and find some sounds that are really organic, so it sounds like someone's actually recorded them. And after another 8 bars of these percussion loops, I just added in a 4th one because this leads up to our drop, which is right here. So I just wanted to add a little bit more of rhythm and anticipation just to build up the intensity. So I just added in these bongo hand drums. And look, we're almost ready to get into the drop, but there is another very important component we need to add to any Odesza song, and that is the vocal chops. My favorite thing about any Odesza song is the way they incorporate vocal chops. And look, thankfully, if you're working in FL, once again, it is a pretty straightforward process. The first thing you need when you're creating a good vocal chop is a good vocal sample. So what I like to do is head over to Splice, and if I literally just go down to instruments, I can filter these by vocals, and then I'll filter these by hooks. The reason I like to use hooks is because you get a lot of really clear vocal samples with sometimes long notes that are stretched. And so that's what you want to do when you create a vocal chop. You want to grab a lot of the vowel sounds, so like the R's, the O's, the E's, and then you can kind of create some sort of rhythm with all of those unique sounds. Now, when it comes to trying to find a good sample, one thing that is very important is the key of this. When I'm working with vocal chops, I usually like to grab a sample that is quite a few semitones down from the key I'm currently in. And if you're new to music, what I just said probably just went right over the top of your head. But what I'm trying to say here is that a lot of Odesza's vocal chops, and most vocal chops in general, are always pitched up, which is kind of why they sound so squeaky, but my God, they live in your head rent-free. Now, if my song is in C minor, what I need to do is figure out the keys below that so I can know what to look for the keys inside of Splice. And the best way to do that is ChatGPT. I have possibly the world's longest chat thread inside of ChatGPT, which is literally just me asking, hey, what are the keys below F minor? What are the keys below C major? What are the keys below D major? ChatGPT probably thinks I'm an absolute idiot at this point, and it is so valid to think that. So if my song was in C minor, what I can do is say, what are the keys below C minor? Then it's going to spit me out a long list. So I now know that this is everything that sits under the key of my song. And when I'm trying to create vocal chops, I'll usually try and find something that's about 3 to 6 semitones below the actual key. So if I'm using C minor here, I can try and find something in A minor down to, let's say, F sharp minor. So back over here in Splice, what I can do is actually filter these by the specific key. Now look, this is the original vocal sample that I started with.
Dance with me, baby. Have you been thinking about me lately?
And then once you've got your sample, of course, you need to chop that up. And there is a tool that does that super easy for you inside of FL, and that is the SliceX tool here. So if you open up a new SliceX channel, you just need to drag your audio into this section here, select this little snip icon, and if I open up the vocal that I used, this is what it's going to look like. So FL's automatically going to break down all of the unique sounds inside of that phrase into these nice little markers. But before I can do anything with these notes, what I need to do is make sure I pitch these up so they're in the correct key of my song. So if you head over to this little keyboard icon here, you'll see that I pitched mine up 300 cents. So 3 semitones in order to get it into the original key of my song. And once we've taken care of this, we can open up the piano roll and you'll see a long list of notes. Each one of these notes is of course a snippet of our vocal phrase. And when it comes to trying to find a good groove for your vocal chops, there's no real right or wrong way. Honestly, the most effective way I make vocal chops is just by throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what works. And then eventually you can find yourself into a nice rhythm like this. Now, it definitely does also help if you just loop a section of your song while you're in SliceX. It just allows you to actually see how your vocal chop sounds in the timing of your song. Now, when it comes to the processing of these vocal chops, I haven't actually done too much. All I've done is taken off some of the high end, and that's because I have a low pass filter happening here. So before the chorus, I just wanted to kind of introduce slowly and then eventually open up. So that way it just helps build the intensity. I've just got some endless smile on it. I've also changed some of the EQ. I pulled up the low end on this by the tiniest bit just to give it a bit more oomph down low. And then of course I've added on some reverb to that. The other big thing I've done is I've actually exported this vocal chop out to audio. Then I've added in that exported audio and I pitched it down an octave. So I just find that sometimes vocal chops sit really high up in the mix because after all, we have pitched them up. So sometimes they don't really have any oomph downstairs, if you know what I mean. And so what you can do is just have a version that's pitched down an entire octave, and then this is what it will sound like. And look, by all means, it's not very flattering, but that's okay. Because in the entire mix, as you can see, I've dragged the volume of this so far down that it's barely recognizable. But when it's combined with my original vocal chop, it definitely adds more depth to it. And look, once again, I've added the same low pass filter onto that, so that way these vocal chops follow the process of building up to the drop. Then finally, there is one last element before the drop, and that is just a couple of simple rises, nothing too special. Now, when I'm building cinematic music, I love to use a lot of rises, swells, cymbals. They really just help you transition throughout different parts of your song. So here's a good example of some that I've added. And of course, something that you might have also noticed there was that I had these little glitch sounds that play right before the drop. So I always like to back the section off before the chorus so I can have a little pre-drop room just to add something interesting in. Sometimes it might be an extra vocal chop, but in this case, because we're going with the whole space vibe, I wanted to add these glitch sounds, and this is what they sound like in isolation. Now to get something like that, literally just go into Splice and type in glitch and just run through all of the different samples until you kind of find something that you like. One thing I will point out is, as you can see with all of these automations here, these are just panning from left to right. So that just creates this awesome cinematic effect where the glitch comes in and then it releases on the other side. It's the moment we've all been waiting for. How can we make a really cinematic, big, Odesza style drop? The very first thing I like to do when I'm building out a drop is create some sort of drum loop or pattern that I can build everything around. The easiest way to create a good drum pattern is to just find one on Splice that you like and then completely change it. So what I've done is I've just searched for a kind of rhythm that I like. Now, while I might not like the actual sound of those drums, I like the rhythm of it. So what I've gone and done is built out my own drum loop that's mapped to this. So I've got my kicks in line with the kick and also the snare in line with the snare. Now, when you're trying to choose drums for an Odesza style track, this is very important. Sample selection is absolutely everything. What you want is a nice big cinematic drum that sounds like someone's going to war. So I'll just run you through all the layers I have. I have this wide kick. It's almost like a stomp. Sometimes if you're trying to search through samples on Splice, I'd even recommend searching for stomp instead of kick. I also have this one here. This one's really punchy, so it just pushes through the mix. And then when it comes to my snares, these are really organic sounding. So they're almost like a drum rim instead of an actual snare. And the reason for that is because I just liked the actual sound of the snare in that drum loop that I showed you. So here's the layers I have. Now, one thing that's really important when you're trying to create an Odesza style track is if your snares have this little pre-audio section before the main snare hits, you should just embrace the hell out of that and make it so it's shifted off grid. Because if you have this on grid, it just sounds very robotic and repetitive. Like all the snares hit at once. Whereas if you're trying to create an Odesza style track, you want it to literally just sound like someone is playing a snare drum next to you. And of course, humans aren't perfect, and that is what we love about Odesza style of music. It has these kind of imperfections to it, which are very intentional. So if I just shift this the tiniest bit, in my mind, it kind of just changes the vibe completely. Once we've figured out a drum loop, what they're gonna do is add a bass layer on top of that. Now, this is pretty straightforward. I've just grabbed the bass from my chord progression, I've added it into a new instrument, and I've just got two pretty straightforward layers here. There's nothing too special about this bass. I've got this layer here. Now that layer is using a serum preset, and then I've also just gone ahead and used a bass from the flex patch inside of FL. And look, that one just sounds like this. Now something you might have noticed about this bass is that it pulses, so it gives more movement to the actual song. Now that is just because I've sidechained this bass, so if I go over to my channel rack, open up my chorus bass, the only thing I've done to this is add this nice little kickstart to it. And then I've also just removed some of the high end, so that way it doesn't interfere with our chords that we're gonna add in a moment. So when it comes to our chords, which is the next layer of our sandwich, this is the part that always excites the hell out of me when it comes to making a song. I like to put a lot of emphasis on my chords because they're what's gonna give the largest amount of sound possible to our chorus. So if I open up my chords here, this is what they sound like. And one thing you might have noticed is that these chords have a lot more notes than anything I've shown you from our original chord progression. And that is because I've just thickened these up a bit. So my chords for the chorus will follow the 3 notes from our original chords that we created at the start of this video. But in order to thicken them up, what I've done is just added an extra 2 notes at the bottom of every single bar. Now, how did I do that? It was pretty straightforward. All I did was just add an additional note. Then I highlighted it, just pitched it down an octave, and moved it into place. And then I did the exact same thing for the second note, and then I did the exact same thing for every single note in every single bar here. So that really just thickens the sound of that. Now, when it comes to the actual sound of my chords, I'm just using 2 serum presets. Now, another thing is that I've also sidechained these chords the same as my bass, just to give it more of a pulsing feel. And other than that, I haven't actually done much else to them. I've thrown a little bit of reverb on them, but that's about it. I've also, on top of that, added in the strings. Now, I separated these from my chords just because later on in my song, I want to play these strings separately without my chords. But these strings follow the exact same notes that we used from our chords, so you can copy and paste those across. And I'm just using these strings inside of Flex. So these are the basic strings, the all strings sustain. I think these sound beautiful. And look, I use them all the time when I'm trying to make Odesza vibe songs. Now, if I combine all of these elements together, you can start to see our chorus is piecing together nicely. One very important thing I want to do to all these chords before we move on is just add another layer of sidechaining to them. Now, sidechaining is something that I didn't realize how good Odesza was at this until I got into making music. But what you'll find is in most Odesza songs, they'll add sidechaining to their sidechaining and then also sidechain that as well. They love to sidechain. Now, if you're new to music, sidechaining is just a fancy way of saying they're turning the volume up and down. I remember when I was a little kid, I used to sit in my parents' car and play with the radio volume, and I'd flick it up and down and pretend I was like mixing some sort of concert. That's essentially all sidechaining is. Now, we've already sidechained those chords as I showed you, but I want to take things another step further. And what you'll see is I have this little sidechaining automation down the bottom here in red, and that's just essentially a volume automation, which as you can see turns the sound on, turns it off, turns it back on, and turns it off again. And this is what it sounds like. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not much, but it adds so much character to your song. Now, I am going to quickly show you how to create this, but if you do know how to do it, please bear with me. To save me from having to create a volume automation on every single instrument that I want to add this effect to, what I'm going to do is create something called a bus. So if I open up my channel rack here, you'll see I have this pink channel called the sidechain bus. Now, this bus is essentially what the name suggests. If my channel rack is a freeway, each one of these instruments would be a car driving on it. So right now we've just got traffic flowing through this freely. But if I want to start and stop the volume of each one of these vehicles, I can do that the hard way by holding up a stop sign for every single one, or I can just tell everyone to leave their cars at home and jump on a bus together. So that way, instead of stopping each individual car, I can stop one bus. And when that bus comes to a halt, everyone's just a passenger on that. So they don't really have a choice but to stop with it. So in order to create that, all you have to do is make a new channel and then route all of your existing instruments to that channel. So as you'll see, I've got my chorus bass, my strings, my chord. These are all routed to the sidechain. And how you create this is super straightforward. I'll just show you on a new channel here. Just select on the channel you want, right click on this arrow down the bottom and select to route to this track only. Now what this will do, it still allows your individual channel to have all of these effects on it. But once it's finished processing all of these effects, it's going to move over to this sidechain channel, and then it's going to add all of these effects. And on this channel, I've only added one effect, and that is the fruity balance. And then I've right clicked on this and I've created an automation clip, which is truly just going to allow me to turn the volume up and down. And look, there's no right or wrong way to do sidechaining. You can start and stop your song whenever the hell you want. Usually with a lot of future-based music, which is what Odesza is, it'll be positioned around their drums. Usually when the snare hits, the volume just cuts out, and then when the kick comes back in, it just explodes again. It creates this awesome effect. What I've done down the back end of the automation here is literally just act like a child with a pen that's doodling on a sketch pad. I just took my positioning here off grid, and then I just drew some random lines until I found this cool stutter effect. Now look, this isn't completely necessary, but I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite parts of the song. Now, although most of our elements are coming together for this chorus, we're not quite there yet. In terms of building this overall sandwich, there's one last thing I want to add down to the bottom section before we get to the beautiful sauces that sit on top and just make it sound delicious. When I'm making an Odesza style song, I just like to add in this little vocal stutter effect, which just fills out some of the frequencies. So if you want this kind of effect, just go into Splice and literally type in the word vocal atmosphere. And you just want to find a sound that kind of loops itself. And look, this is going to be pretty quiet in the mix, but it's going to make a massive difference. It just kind of gives that ear candy that Odesza is really known for. Now, sometimes you won't be able to find the perfect sample, so you might have to make it yourself. And a great example is the sample I've used here today. So this is the original sample I found from Splice. So as you can see, I didn't like the entire sample, so I just grabbed the start of this and then I just looped it so it creates that nice sound that I'd shown you before. While we're filling out the mix, I've also just added in the percussion loops from the intro of our song into the chorus. Once again, try and listen to any Odesza song, and what you'll notice is that while the chorus is playing, they're not just playing a kick, snare, kick, snare. There's usually like 5 other percussion elements that are happening at once. So I've just gone and copied across the 3 percussion loops that I added at the start of my song, but what I've also done is I've routed these to my sidechaining channel, and that's just because when the sidechain cuts out, I want the percussion to also stop. I've also gone and added in another atmosphere layer. Now, you could use the atmosphere layers that you added at the intro of your song. I personally just found that the ones I used didn't really work in my chorus. And as you would have noticed, this is also routed to my sidechain channel, so it cuts out whenever that sidechain is off. And look, we're almost there. Now we can get to the really interesting part of the chorus, and that is the leads that are going to sit on top of it. So I've just got my pad here that I added in the intro. Nothing's changed. And then I've also got my ARP as well from the intro. Nothing's changed there. So when I play my chorus, you'll start to hear everything coming together nicely. Go! Look, at this point, it is so close. There is one last thing we need to add, and that is I want to put our vocal chop back in. So what I've gone and done is just created a very similar pattern to the vocal chop in the intro of my song here. It's slightly different. It's just a little bit faster, so there's some more intensity to it. And look, once again, I've also exported a version of that out as an MP3, and then I pitched that down an octave, so that way it just sounds a bit thicker. Go! Now, like most songs, we need something to change after 8 bars here. We need something that's going to keep the song moving forward and keep people interested. So what I've done is I've just added in this little break section before 8 bars finishes. And once again, I've added in a bunch of different glitches. So if we're going with that space theme, this is what I've cooked up. I honestly want it to feel like someone has accidentally hit the hyperdrive button in a spaceship and they're just getting pinned back. And then I want the intensity of the song to really pick up. So the only thing I've changed in the second part of our chorus is the drum loop. So instead of doing this kind of future bass style drum loop, I'm just going to go forward to the floor house beat. So I'm using the exact same kick and snare samples, but they're just hitting on every single beat. And I've also added this hi-hat loop. And this is what you get. And then aside from this, the only other thing I've done is actually just remove the vocal chop out. Because the drums have changed, that is enough in the chorus. Then to finish up in the chorus, all I've done is I've just added a riser and then a couple of different glitch effects. And then that will get you smoothly across into the verse. Now, before we wrap up, there is one last thing I want to show you, and that is how we can create a beautiful, seamless intro into our song. By all means, your song can literally just start as soon as someone presses play, but that's not what Odesza would do. Odesza would want you to go on this long, cinematic, emotional journey, and so that's exactly what we're going to do as well. All I've done is I've added an extra 4 bars at the start of my song, and I'm just trying to create this nice vibe here that's really cinematic. And if we're trying to create something like a moment apart, we want it to be space themed. So I've made this beautiful quote here with some nice static.
We really did have everything, didn't we?
I've also then just added in the pad from the intro of our song. But what I've also done is just add a low pass filter on this, so that way you don't hear it and then it gradually just builds up. I've also just extended one of our atmospheres so it starts straight away. And then finally, I've just added in this little vocal riser and I've just panned it so it kind of comes from one ear and then finishes out the other. Look, that is everything I wanted to run through in this video today. I hope it was helpful. Before we go and preview the finished song though, I just want to say 2 quick things. Number 1 is that I put a finished version of the song up on Spotify, so you can go and stream it. And look, I should say it's across every streaming platform. And finally, I have a full version of this course over on my website. So today I've ran through the process of creating an intro and the first chorus of our song. Now up to that point is what most YouTube tutorials cover. But if you're anything like me, when I started making music, I found one of the hardest parts was actually creating the verse that flows out from the chorus, and then try to build up the song again in a way that didn't sound too repetitive to the beginning, and of course create a second drop which is slightly different from the first. And so if you want to see the step-by-step process of how I've created the rest of this song in the same level of detail as what I've shown you so far, I definitely recommend heading over to my website and checking that out. For now though, let's just go ahead and take a look at what we've made.
We really did have everything, didn't we?